As politicians begin tactical move ahead of Nigeria's 2019 elections, President Muhammadu Buhari and the Senate President Bukola Saraki meet in the State House.
Make healthcare service a divine call and end public trust. President Buhari challenges Nigerian medical practitioners.
National Chairman of the All Progressives Congress APC, Comrade Adams Oshiomhole, receives Benue State Governor Samuel Otom, saying the party cannot afford to lose any of its members to crisis.
The Nigeria Police to continue deployment of cutting-edge technology in maintaining the country's internal security.
Today on Good Morning Nigeria, we will be taking a look at flood disasters in Nigeria. "44 people have been reported killed and 500 houses swept away as 5 villages in Jebia district of Katsina State were affected by heavy flooding after a river burst its banks following hours of heavy rainfall from Sunday night to Monday early in the morning. As we speak, Kingsley, the over 5,000 people displaced by the disaster are currently taking shelter at the Muhammadu Rabiu Model Primary School in the state.
Well, you know, Kirian, the situation is not peculiar to Katsina. Now, just days before the GBL disaster, at least 11 persons were killed, while properties worth several millions of naira were also lost during another heavy downpour, which happened in Abuja, the Ogun State capital. And of course, the rain started around about 4 o'clock in the afternoon and took just about 3 hours to wreak its havoc.
All right, and can you remember also, Kingsley, that Nigeria had some of the worst flooding in recent times in 2012, when 30 of Nigeria's 36 states were affected by flood. The then president, Dr. Goodluck Jonathan, called it a national disaster at the time. More than 360 people were killed and about 2 million more were displaced from their homes. The 2012 disaster was attributed to unusual heavy rains and the release of excess water from the Lalu Dam in Cameroon.
Well, it appears Nigeria is not out of the woods yet, Kirian. The Nigerian Meteorological Agency, NIMET, had warned in June this year that many parts of the country would experience flooding on account of the shift in rainfall pattern caused by climate change. Now, NIMET's 2018 seasonal rainfall prediction also shows that a lot of water will be made available on the surface between the last week of July and the end of August.
And you may recall that after the 2012 flood, the Nigerian Meteorological Agency, NIMET, said state governors were warned well ahead of the disaster, but they failed to act. Now, we have the 2018 seasonal rainfall predictions. Will authorities act to save lives and property? Have we learned any lesson from the 2012 national disaster? What can Nigerians do to protect their lives and property?
Well, unfortunately, there are so many harmful habits that people have that precipitate flooding. So apart from rapid urban growth and poor planning, climate change, as well as poor environmental sanitation, how can the relevant agencies ensure that the devastation caused by flooding in Nigeria is mitigated?
All right, and how can all affected parties work together with the government to make flood disasters a thing of the past in Nigeria? That's our topic for conversation on Good Morning Nigeria for today. We thank you for tuning in. I am Kirian Umar, and we are reaching you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority, the largest TV network in Africa.
I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I join my colleague Kirian in also welcoming you to the program. It's a wet morning here in Abuja, Nigeria's Federal Capital Territory, from where we are reaching you live, as always, on the network service of the NTA. Now, in the course of today's program, we shall, of course, bring you our complimentary segments, including newspaper review business, sports, foreign, and entertainment. In the meantime, we're joining our colleague, Ogwa Onyedibia, for the morning news. Hi, Ogwa. Morning.
Good morning, Kingsley and Kirian. Good morning, Nigeria, and welcome to the news. President Muhammadu Buhari Thursday evening granted audience to the Senate President Bukola Saraki at his official residence. State House correspondent Adamu Sambo reports that the meeting might not be unconnected with the skillful political maneuvering ahead of Nigeria's 2019 elections.
The discussion is all about APC Osun.
We came to rejoice. We are happy.
And the national chairman of the All Progressives Congress Party, APC, Comrade Adams Oshomole, says the party cannot afford to lose any of its members because of internal crisis in some state chapters of the party. This was when he received Benue State Governor Samuel Otom at the party's national secretariat.
I'm here in APC. I'm a member of APC. I'm still flying the flag of APC. And I only said I was given a red card, but I've been corrected by the National Secretary. That was serious enough to make myself available out of the pitch.
Governor Otom is not going anywhere. He's a very, very prominent member of our party. We appreciate his leadership in Benue, and we will do everything possible to help those who have issues to have those issues resolved.
And to health matters now, medical practitioners in the country have been challenged to make healthcare service a truly divine call so as to earn and sustain public trust. President Muhammadu Buhari, who threw the challenge at an audience with the national officers of the Nigerian Medical Association, restated his administration's commitment to the universal health coverage through improved budgetary allocation to the sector.
I'd like to urge you that you make your service a truly divine call by making sure that you explore all necessary avenues to resolve any grievances rather than embarking on strike. This will surely earn you trust from the people and government of Nigeria.
And the federal government says it is prepared to tackle the many perennial ecological challenges ravaging many communities in Anambra State. Minister of Interior Lieutenant General Abdurrahman Dambazal stated this during the handover of erosion control works at Ndanobi and Agbo in Idemili South local government area of Anambra State.
Successful completion of this project would enhance the living standard of the people around the community and its surroundings.
The Nigerian Police Force says it will continue to deploy cutting-edge technology in maintaining the country's internal security in line with international best practices and the rule of law. Inspector General of Police Ibrahim Idris reaffirmed this while inaugurating the Special Tactical Squad office at Gusape in Abuja.
These units, I must say, have actually been very instrumental. The successes made so far by the Nigerian Police Force under my watch in the arrest of suspected terrorists, armed robbers, kidnappers, and cattle rustlers. The decision to build these offices of this unit is to provide comfortable office accommodation for the staff to make them more effective in the performance of their duties.
And that's the news for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Kirian and Kingsley after this break.
Unemployment, notably youth unemployment, features strongly in our party's manifesto. We intend to attack the problem promptly through revival of agriculture.
The 30K is going a long way. Actually, I bought an acre of land for 60K like 2012, and presently I have a cassava farm and a yam farm.
Reorganized, trained, and fully equipped, we are the new improved Nigeria Police Force. We fight crime, we bust syndicates. Whatever the crime, wherever the hideout, the Nigeria Police Force will get you busted. Stop kidnapping, armed robbery, murder, pipeline vandalism, and other criminal activities. Be productive. Be security conscious. Join the police force to secure your life and property. This message is from the Nigeria Police Force Public Relations Department.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the daring and invincible Louis the Mosquito. Responsible for 200 malaria cases all on its own. Is there anything that can kill Louis? Morphine! Presenting Mortine's Power Guard. Its powerful formula kills malaria mosquitoes fast. So, get Mortine's Power Guard.
These days, people get their news and information from more media sources than ever before. Some of the news and information given are fake, unverified, doctored, and manufactured to create confusion, stir disaffection, and cause disunity. Before you believe or share any news, ask yourself, is this real? Is it from a credible source? Is it verified or verifiable? Fake news is dangerous. Whether you do it for fun or for political gains, real people can get hurt. Fake news, don't create it, don't spread it.
This is a public service announcement from NTA.
Whenever pain occurs, you want quick relief. Try new Nurofen Express. It goes to the source of pain and gets to work in under 15 minutes. That's why Nurofen Express delivers fast and effective relief. New Nurofen Express works at the source of pain. Fast.
Being a mom is great, but when your child has a fever, you don't know what to do. I trust Nurofen for Children to take care of my child's pain and fever.
Effective relief you can trust.
You will not be burning your money again in paying NEPA bills. Thank you very much.
Many people feel they have a responsibility to be irresponsible to those we feel have given them reason to show them irresponsibility.
One day I wonder, give us the services, we will pay you after later. But the government has said, pay us. We will give you services after later.
When we shirk our duties to pay for services like lights, do we make it possible for ourselves to be in the light or to dwell in darkness?
How can they be asking for money when light is unstable?
Code Meter is another mind-blowing and funny episode of your rib-cracking comedy, Professor Jumbo, coming your way this week and laugh like never before.
No,
over and out.
Brought to you by Glow.
The largest data network, Glow Unlimited.
Winning in hot and dry conditions is hard. Causes the body to sweat, which attracts germs that are easily passed from one person to another.
What keeps you so cool, man?
Dettol Cool combines Dettol's protection and an invincible icy feel. For super cool confidence, use Dettol Cool.
Dettol soap is now also available for 100 Naira only.
And the program is still Good Morning Nigeria. And now we turn to business. Concerted efforts to revive Nigeria's cocoa industry is in top gear as Nigeria Export Promotion Council requests the support of Afrexim in the development of the value chain. Let's now join Comforter Modu for more on business news.
Good morning. Nigerians have commended the federal government's decision to float a national career, describing it as an action long overdue. A cross-section of people say the career, if properly managed, will be a major contributor to the economy.
When you call the Nigerian as a whole, you talk about the things that contribute to national economy. You talk of airways, you talk of waterways, you talk of land transport. And this is one major thing that this government has done for this country.
And it is good that it's coming at this point in time because, one, it will provide jobs for people, for the youth. You have the engineers that will be working there, the aeronautical engineers, the engineer that will be servicing the plane. You have the crew, the cabin crew will be there, then and some other staff that will be working there. So it's good for the country that we are doing this at this point in time.
The International Air Transport Association projects that global airline industry will transport 3.78 billion passengers and 52.7 million tons of cargo in 2018. Meanwhile, the Nigerian Export Promotion Council is working with stakeholders to revive the cocoa industry as part of its Zero Oil plan. The council, in collaboration with the African Import and Export Bank, are particular about stopping the export of raw material from the country through scaling up of production. Analysts predict higher prices over the rest of 2018 due to tightening supplies of cocoa.
The idea is that we move ourselves to a position where we stop exporting raw materials. And for cocoa, that is really key. And then introduce cocoa products, into Nigeria.
Our strategy into the West and other countries abroad, our strategy is to add value at home.
And now to a summary of trading figures on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. With business news, I'm Comfort Amodu.
Thank you very much, Comfort, for the business packet. Next on Good Morning Nigeria is a review of the newspapers.
Now it's time for a review of headlines on today's national dailies, and here we have the reviewer, Bayo Toyabi. Bayo, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Killian. Good morning, Kinsley, and good morning, Nigeria.
Yeah, Bayo, good to see you. Let's take a look at the front pages. I have the Punch, as I have the Authority, and of course an editorial from the New Telegraph. These stories are many, and it's also diverse. Let's begin with the Punch newspaper from the stories headlined above the nameplate. Reps, that's House of Reps, ask NCAA to test pilots for alcohol and drugs. That's on page 26. Buhari mourns as ex-Inspector General of Police Kumasi dies, page 34. Dapchi girls, Group 1's security chief probed for diverting £3 million ransom. And Benue Governor Otom makes a U-turn, says I've not dumped APC. So the red card has been amnestied, I believe. Yeah, of course. Details of that story can be found on page 7. 2 earpieces there beside the nameplates of the Punch. Buhari, Oshibajo, Saraki and governors meet in Aso Rock. And bloodshed must stop in Nigeria. Sultan, Khan and Oni, that's on page 11. A list story comes with a kicker, 2019 elections. Police and civil defense demand 317 million naira to feed dogs and horses. And immigration wants 126 million naira to print name tags. Details of the story can be found on page 7. Now, Ondo police arrest car snatcher after stealing 32 vehicles. Every day for the thief and 1 day for the law enforcement agents. I'll contest Ogun governorship in 2019. That's according to ex-football star, captain of the Green Eagles, Segun Odegbami. That's on page 10. We may not participate in 2019 elections. PDP, that's page 12. Federal government to engage 300,000 new NPA beneficiaries. Politicians interested in winning elections than governance. That's according to former INEC chairman Jega. National carrier needs $300 million initial capital attributed to the federal government. And rowdy session as Southeast senators knock Buhari for lopsided appointments. Page 11. Kirian.
All right, let's go straight to the Daily Sun. The Daily Sun, just beside the nameplate, to have Senate tackles Buhari on appointments with a rider, Southeast Senators Keek. It's on page 6. Now, the main headline, FARC deadlock. Governors reject NNPC's 147 billion naira remittance. Warn against spending unapproved funds on page 2. Now, below the photograph where you have President Buhari, Dr. Saraki, the Senate President, and others at the State House yesterday. And now, Autumn makes U-turn on dumping APC. With a rider, APC Reps Caucus holds crucial meeting. It's on page 6. Now, ex-IGP Kumasi for burial today on page 4. Then 2019 election, PDP considers boycott. The rider rules out credible polls. Page 8 has that story. Buhari, Oshibajo, Saraki, governors meet in Aso Villa on page 6. Bayo.
Yes, President Muhammadu Buhari has condoled the family, the Kumasi family, as well as the people and government of Katsina. The president says he will receive the news of the death of his classmate with shock. Alhaji Ibrahim Kumasi, the 9th Inspector General of Police, is reported to have died at the hospital. His younger brother, Alhaji Dahiru Kumasi, has confirmed the sad development. He served the nation as Inspector General of Police between 1993 and 1999. He was also chairman of Ariwa Consultative Forum, and he held the traditional title of Sardaunan Katsina, as well as the Garkuwan Hausa of Daura. He died at age 76. Incidentally, the former Chief Justice who died, Aloysius Katsina Alu, also died at 76.
That's right. Unfortunately, having a string of obituaries in recent times. There was also, of course, there was a lawyer, the oldest lawyer in practice, Gomez, who passed away in Lagos also this week, but he was 90. That's right.
Now, the Federal Allocation Accounts Committee has failed to meet for May and June, and the Commissioners of Finance want the deadlock resolved. However, the National Economic Council is required to meet today, and the hope and expectation is that it will be resolved. What are the contentions? The Governors Forum says they do not accept that 147 billion paid by the NNPC to the Federation account. NNPC says there was an agreement, and that's why they pay 112 billion per month. The governors are saying that that payment was when oil was $48 per barrel. Now that it is $78 per barrel, you cannot be paying all the same thing. The governors also rejected 88 billion that the NNPC claims to have paid as subsidy. They are also challenging the 15 billion that they claim as miscellaneous expenses, 9 billion for pipeline maintenance, and 3 billion for crude oil loss. The governors are asking who approved this payment. The National Economic Council has a task to resolve that, because for 2 months now, no federation account, and civil servants certainly will be suffering because apart from overhead costs which will suffer, the salaries are certainly going to suffer, and people will be in quandary.
Well, there's a story from The Punch that I read, is the lead story, 2019 elections. Police and civil defense demanding 317 million naira to feed dogs and horses for use in the election. I mean, one question that will arise normally is that, all right, they already own these dogs and these horses. Not so? Now, if they do, it means that ordinarily they would feed the dogs and horses in the course of using them for internal security operations.
Throughout the year.
So, yeah, of course. So why then would we need any special budgetary allocation to feed the dogs and horses in the course of the election?
And at this point, the dogs are being fed currently, you know, unless they are going to acquire more dogs for the purposes of the election. If they're going to have acquire more dogs, perhaps they might need, you know, more funds to feed them. But, well...
These are the issues. You know, sometimes, it's very significant. We don't sometimes look at our figures as to what we are doing on account of the fact that they have inflationary pressures, exchange rate challenges, and so on and so forth. So the cost of conducting elections is always rising. But I'll give you an example. The cost of conducting South Africa's first non-racial election in 1994 was much higher than the cost of conducting another election 10 years later in 2004. In other words, the cost of conducting the election in 2004 was much lower than the cost of conducting the election in 1994. In the meantime, the exchange rate was also different. Exchange rate was about 3 to 1 in 1994. By year 2004, exchange rate was about 6 to 1.
So what should be the reasons for the
galloping? It is very puzzling that you have budgetary allocation to feed dogs and horses. Yes, granted that during elections, security agencies often use the horses, horse riders, and sometimes their dogs to do some element of crowd control. This is an error. I think if my instincts are anything to go by, these are the recurring error when you have subhead for budgeting. Right. And you just place figures there. And sometimes you have a subhead for dogs and horses, and you have huge sums of money put there. And this is why there's need for the budgetary proposals to be checked by the National Assembly, and critical questions must be asked.
After the elections in 2019, will they not continue to have the dogs and the horses? Exactly. Will they not feed them?
What is the difference between feeding the dogs now and the election year? Okay, now...
Kyria, let's continue.
Yes, I have this day newspaper here. Above the nameplate, power supply remains low at 3,838 megawatts as Fashola Disco's Speaker. Fashola, of course, is the Minister of Power, Works and Housing. The discourse represented the companies that are involved in the distribution of electricity. Now, trouble for national carrier as House mulls probe of concession deal. The story is on page 8. Now, the main headline this morning on this day newspaper: don't defect, Buhari urges Saraki. With 2 riders, you can't go back to PDP, or Shomole tells Otom. Benue governor accuses Akume of fueling crisis. And now more stories on politics now. Second is as the PDP chairman. PDP considering participation in 2019 elections. And below that we have a Lagos 6 Buhari's intervention to end Apapa gridlock. That's on page 10. That's all about it on this day.
All right, this authority newspaper is next for us. Above the name flag of the authority, Melaye, that's Senator Dino Melaye, escapes another assassination attempt. Details on page 2. Imo grazing bill, dead on arrival. That's according to the speaker. And reps probe 8 trillion naira loss of revenue to illegal mining. Tom retraces steps, returns to APC. Lead story says 2,359 inmates on death row may face execution. NEC mandates governors to act on death sentences, and $1 billion insecurity fund not disbursed from ECA, that's SS Code account, and Buhari, Saraki, and governors meet in Aso Rock. Buhari's appointments, Southeast and Northern senators in verbal war, page 3. I received 5,000 naira for each suicide bomb attack. That's according to a suspect. And Ekweme's family visits Buhari, pleads for completion of mausoleum. Page 3.
This curious story about power supply to about just a little over 3,000. The interesting thing is who is giving this information, because the generating companies say they have the capacity to generate up to 7,000 megawatts, but the transmission system does not have the ability to transmit that quantity. And the discos at the other end are now making this allegation. I think there are a lot of questions that needs to be asked. the transmission network needs to be improved upon so that what power is generated can be effectively transmitted.
I think the latest that we got, perhaps from the government angle, is that Nigeria is transmitting up to 7,000 megawatts. Right.
Generating. The power is available. But can you transmit the 7,000 megawatts? Do you have the facility to transmit that?
I think what is key here is actually the role of the distribution companies. Because from distribution, before you talk about transmission, so
you have to transmit before you distribute. Yes. Anyway, leave that to them. They will sort themselves out. Talking about 2,359 persons on death row, you recall that there was a call to governors who are supposed to assent to the execution of this. Many of them have developed COVID and are reluctant to sign onto some of these death sentences that have been there, some of them over decades. And it is also contributing to part of the congestion of the prison. Now on the political scene, Governor Samuel Tom says he's still a member of the APC. After a meeting with the national chairman of the party, he said the red card that was issued by the state executive has been nullified by the national headquarters. The chairman of the APC, Chairman Oshiomhole, says issues in Benue are not insurmountable. The solution will be found to the problem. Also, the papers are speculating because there was a meeting between the Senate president, the vice president, and the president yesterday, and they are also talking about overtures to stop moves for diversion. Meanwhile, the People's Democratic Party has given an indication that it may be boycotting 2019 general elections. And what comes to mind, Kingsley, you remember what happened in Kenya? Odinga boycotted elections, and he had to regret at the end of the day. For elections, it's better you participate in it rather than boycott and live to regret. But the grounds of the People's Democratic Party, according to the chairman, is that our opinion is that INEC and security agencies are directly involved in manipulation. In fact, the National Working Committee has said that they have evidence to indicate that there's discrepancies between the votes that were cast and the result that were announced.
Yeah, that's right. Kieran, election boycott, of course, the most popular Nigerian politician who was known for the boycott principle, Mbono Ojike. Boycottable. Yes, boycottable. But in the end, boycotting an election is meaningless.
Of course, it's not the best option.
It has no impact whatsoever. The only impact it has is probably a moral statement. And the moral statement has an effect only momentarily.
It has no electoral value.
Absolutely, it has no electoral value. Go to the field and face...
Yes, one may actually ask, why should a party that had the opportunity of running the country for 16 years now boycott an election? I don't want to see that as an option, so to speak. I mean, there's a tendency that when you boycott election, well, the other side, of course, enjoys it because it's going to be irreversible after election must have been concluded.
Absolutely. The Constitution or even the electoral law does not make provision for a boycott of an election as a ground for nullifying the outcome of that very election. Let's face it. So it's perhaps that's a statement that the PDP itself will have to worry about. Yeah, but the other story we read has to do with the national carrier that is said to need 300 million. There are a lot of questions with regard to Nigeria Air that has been unveiled. We hope that, in the days ahead, those questions will be answered, much more concretely, because you have a lot of speculation flying around. This story that The Punch has published at the foot of its front page is sourced from a Reuters. That Reuters is an international news agency. Reuters has that story, and it's talking about all kinds of interests that are keen, to participate in it. But there are a number of questions that will still need to be resolved. In particular, what is the shareholding structure? What is, who are the promoters of the airline? If you say the federal government or the Nigerian government has 5%, who will own the other 95%? And then on whose behalf is a statement being made now that, the airline will begin operation in December? Are the other promoters also on the same page?
And others are asking, is it feasible to have a national carrier operating by the year's end? And others, experts say, yes, what is required within a period of 4 to 5 months, everything can be provided, provided there's the determination to do
as
it.
Many are concerned, this is business, right? And I don't believe that government will enter into a contractual arrangement without making sure that the nation is not going to be, is going to be shortchanged.
That's right. Kieran, Bayo, let's go to our editorial from the New Telegraph on page 15. And the title is The Killing of Corps Member Linda Igwetu. She was unfortunately killed by a policeman in circumstances that remain unclear, and this took place on the 4th of July in Abuja.
A very sad development. The youth corps had finished what they call their passing out parade, and apparently were trying to hold a celebration of their having served their fatherland. At 3 a.m. on their way home, there was this incident, and the policeman was alleged to have shot the young girl. The other controversy that followed was that if she probably had got the quick attention at the hospital, she probably may have survived. The hospitals are saying that she was brought in a very poor condition and she couldn't survive. But the knee-jerk reaction that has followed is that the officer who allegedly shot the girl has been dismissed and is in custody and is to be charged for murder.
Was it an accidental discharge or deliberate shooting? Because that's the question to...
Well, I think the investigations, when completed and when the case is brought to court, all those facts will come into the fore. But the family of the girl are also asking questions, and they want justice to be done.
Bayo, that's the much that we can take. We'd like to thank you for being here with us today, and indeed also the week. We hope you enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.
Okay, it's still Good Morning Nigeria. We'll take a short break now. When we return, of course, we'll be dealing with our item for conversation, which has to do with flooding in Nigeria. And today has been a wet morning in Abuja itself.
Hate speech is not a joke. It incites genocide and crimes against humanity. Most of Africa's civil wars are caused by hate speech from one tribe against another. We don't want it here. The Nigerian government stands firm against hate speech.
Under no conditions whatsoever should we tolerate or excuse or justify hate speech or hateful conduct of any kind, especially where such is illegal.
There's no doubt that the resurgent push for separatism, as well as the rising cases of ethnic and religious disharmony, are all traceable to the growing phenomenon of hate speech.
One nation bound in freedom, peace and unity.
Nigeria, one nation, one people.
This is a public service announcement brought to you by NTA.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the daring and invincible Louis the Mosquito. Responsible for 200 malaria cases all on its own. Is there anything that can kill Louis? Morphine! Presenting Mortise Power Guard. Its powerful formula kills malaria mosquitoes fast. So, get Mortise Power Guard.
Fake news which is shared for malicious purposes is a danger to our peace and security in Nigeria. Misinformation as fake news is a serious threat to our hard-earned democracy and promotes hatred and misunderstanding between our communities. We are all responsible for stopping the spread of fake news in its tracks. So, always check the source and credibility of any news item. Say no to fake news. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information.
Madam. Brought us as usual.
As usual. You have no problem.
For the three
you are welcome, sir.
As usual, yeah?
Welcome. You take that one. You take that one. You don't understand? We want Nigerian homegrown rice. Finish. You don't have? You don't have?
Join the rice revolution today.
No other rice that tastes like Nigerian rice. Are you sorry? That's the Nigerian rice we are talking about. Chocolate made in Nigerian rice. Healthy food. I'm going to bring Mrs. Momo to come to chocolate rice made in Nigeria here. And see how it are made.
Correct.
And how they are cooked.
Correct.
Homegrown rice are good for your health. It will boost our economy and will give employment to our people.
This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
The Nigerian broadcast sector is evolving. Operators, including cameramen and photographers, require new skills and techniques to churn out world-class productions. A unique opportunity is open to all. NTA TV College Jos is organizing a 4-week intensive short course in camera operation techniques aimed at enhancing the professional skills of cameramen and photographers, practicing and freshers. Date 16th July to 10th August 2018. Another 4-week intensive short course in photojournalism and photography holds 13th August to 7th September 2018. Venue for both courses is the TV College premises, NTA TV College, Rayfield, Jos. Fee 100,000 naira per participant. Accommodation inclusive. For more inquiries, contact us on 0806 980 9807 and 0703 660 7155. TV College, Jos. Training you to be the best you want to be.
And to kickstart our conversation this morning, Timothy Yusuf is ready with a background report on flood disasters in Nigeria.
One of the worst floods experienced in Nigeria was the 2012 Nigeria floods, which began in early July 2012 and killed about 363 people and displaced over 2.1 million people. According to the National Emergency Management Agency, 30 of Nigeria's 36 states were affected by the floods. The floods were termed the worst in 40 years and affected an estimated 7 million people. Investigation revealed that the estimated damage and losses caused by the floods was about 2.6 trillion naira. Today, many Nigerian coastal and inland cities are already experiencing heavy rains, leaving residents homeless and penniless. Many have even lost their lives in the last few days to flooding. The Hydrological Services Agency says many states are at high risk. Is another national disaster looming? How can it be averted? What does the government need to do to mitigate the situation? How can Nigerians help? These are some questions guests will be providing answers to on Good Morning Nigeria.
All right, thank you very much, Timothy Yusuf, for that backgrounder. Now we have guests right here with us in the studios to discuss these issues in greater detail. Engineer Omar Bashir Magashe is Director Operational Hydrology, and he's from the Nigeria Hydrological Services Agency. Engineer Magashi, pleasure to have you with us on Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning, Nigeria. Thank you.
Okay, also here with us in the studios is the Director General of the National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA. That's Engineer Mustafa Mehaja. Engineer Mehaja, pleasure to have you with us on the program.
Good morning, viewers.
Okay.
And of course, Professor Mohammed Al-Hassan, from the Faculty of Environment at the University of Abuja, is seated with us also in the studio. Good morning and welcome, Prof.
Good morning, viewers.
All right, we have Alhaji Hamza Mohammed Brudo, Honorable Commissioner for Information and Culture and Home Affairs in Katsina. He's going to be reaching us via Skype from Katsina, for that's the state where we had the major flooding a couple of days ago. And also joining us from Kaduna is the Executive Director, National Water Resource Institute, Kaduna, Professor Emmanuel Adanu. Professor Adanu, you're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you very much.
All right, gentlemen, my colleague just earlier introduced the Commissioner for Information from Katsina State. We do hope that the audio and the video connections via Skype are all right, because we'll take him to give us a sense of what exactly happened in Katsina that led to the losses of lives and property in that disaster. Alhaji Hamza, if you can hear us, tell us how did it happen that Jibia experienced the flooding, and then you had tens of persons who lost their lives?
Good morning, and I can hear you loud and clear. The incidents actually occur on Sunday night as a result of heavy rainfall and lasted for about 4 hours. And you know, since it has happened in the night, there are a lot of implications in this incidents, having been in the night and also unexpected as a natural disaster.
Well, still with you, was the amount of rainfall unusual?
Unusual, because as provided by the experts' prediction, this year's rainfall, unlike in the past, is going to, the Katsina North is going to have more rainfall than in the southern part of Katsina. And, you know, because the soil there is very loose, and unfortunately also people, you know, because of their conventional way of not heeding to some advice, this actually contributed to all this loss of life.
Alhaji Hamza, you have noted that in the area where this occurred had issues with the kind of soil there. But before now, the Hydrological Agency, as well as the Nigerian Meteorological Agency, had, of course, alerted Nigerians on this. And again, Katsina was one of the states noted to that is going to be experiencing unusual rainfall. What efforts was put in place to mitigate this situation, or does the state not know about this alert from these agencies?
Yeah, we have taken a lot of measures by sensitizing people and urging them to desist from erecting buildings in areas that are suspected to be affected by this rainfall or by this very devastating flood. But as I earlier said, you know, there are some nonchalant attitudes by some people that could not easily heed to certain advice. However, government has taken measures to make sure that this incident does not occur by making sure that it makes some improvisation to locate some of these people by providing them with some lands to vacate the place.
All right, stay with you. Jibia, which is the epicenter of the flooding that occurred, you know, less than a week ago, has a major dam project. Was the dam of any utility at all in helping to absorb the excess amount of rainfall, or was the dam breached itself?
Your question is not clear.
I'm saying that Jibia, which was the epicenter of the flooding, has a major dam project. That is the Jibia Dam. Now, was the dam unable to absorb the excess water, or the dam itself was breached?
No, not actually, because I will say more or less this does not have anything to do with the dam, because it is some of the tributaries of some rivers that are channeling their waters towards the area that was affected that actually caused this serious damage because of a lot of some erections and some blockages in some of the drainages we have in the place.
All right, at this point, let us pause you and go to Kaduna, where we have Professor Adanu. Professor Adanu, we learned that you sent some of your men to Jibia in Katsina for them to have a first-hand information as to what actually happened that led to that disaster. Could you educate us on what your men found?
Yeah, good morning again. We sent some of our staff there immediately, and as at, well, this morning too, I got some Google Map and also some explanations. Well, as the commissioner said, the Jibia Dam doesn't have anything to do with this. Incidentally, there are some tributaries that discharge to the main river, I think it's Rima, and these tributaries are discharging a lot of water. Now, at entering the main river, coming downstream, there's a long stretch that is very straight. Then there's a bend on the river, a sharp bend. So waters coming from the tributaries into the main river took a long and fast trip, and then they got checked by that bend, and they started backing up. Now, in the environment of the entrance there's a low land, so it started spilling over. Now, incidentally, the rainfall that caused this was very extensive, high intensity, long duration, and the capacity of that environment to absorb and contain this was very minimal. We're trying to see what we can get from there and the advice to give. But if another rain comes like that, the same thing will happen, because the configuration of the rivers around that place is such that a heavy rainfall cannot be discharged effectively without spreading over the bank. But by the end of the day, we may have a clearer picture and we'll make it available to the government.
Well, Professor Adano, I asked the Katsina State Commissioner for Information earlier whether the amount of rainfall last Sunday in the Jibia area was unusual. What is it that your men have found out? Was the amount of rainfall unusual? Is it that Jibia or that location had not previously experienced, that kind of rainfall there in intensity or in volume?
Well, we have not taken record of the quantity yet. The result has not come. But I'm very sure the extent of rainfall, the duration, and what we've seen so far on ground tells that the rainfall might be a bit exceptional. The prediction from NIMET and the flood outlook by Nigerian Hydrological Service Agency may indicated that in the past, but the total quantity of water was not measured yet. But I believe that to some extent there is an exceptional rainfall, long duration. The commissioner told you that it happened and it was an extensive, very long period rainfall over the night. It is also very devastating, an environment that has a very shallow basins. The small, I would call it a hydrogeomorphic closet. It's a small basin that contributed most of this water. Is adjacent to the one that provides water for Jibia Dam on River Garda. But this closet also has a lot of water, because we have about 7 or 8 of them that came together to transfer the water down to the main river. But the configuration of the rivers there together is very, very important in explaining what has happened. And I think by the end of the week, which is maybe tomorrow, we'll have a clearer picture, because we would have analyzed the data we've collected and then be able to make it public to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Professor Adano. We will return to you in the course of today's conversation. But for now, let's return to Abuja studio. And I'd like to ask Engineer Omar Bashir Magaji. He is the Director of Operational Hydrology, Nigeria. Now, we've had several cases of flooding in this country. The major was that of 2012, which of course destroyed lives and property. Now, what is happening? Is it is your prediction, really a reality as it is now? And if yes, Katsina has been numbered and another area also affected, what are we looking forward to seeing with respect to the fact that the rains are still there?
Thank you, Kiran. What we're expecting is that the rainfalls have just started. There might be more rains. But then the 2012 floods have been floods that had almost a return period of over 50 years. These are floods that we have not seen for quite a very long time, and over the long time of years. So, and the floods of 2012 have been our yardstick for measuring other floods in this country. In 2015 and 2017, we had floods also, but they cannot be up to that magnitude, actually. So we really look forward to seeing more floods in the country. In our predictions of 2018, that is the annual flood outlook, we predicted almost 35 states of the country that will have floods. But also we're expecting almost 318 local governments to be flooded, including what is happening today, what is happening in Abuja.
35 of the 36 states, which is the exception?
Yeah, the exception was Katsina itself, but then we're having Katsina now because this rain.
No, Katsina itself is being No, but
Yeah.
give us a sense. I mean, we have seen what happened in Abuja, for instance. There have been stories out of Ondo, and of course, I'm sure that other coastal states will soon begin to turn in their reports. And then this disaster smack in Katsina.
Yeah.
When will the floods begin, to wreak their havoc if mitigatory measures are not taken?
Yeah, I think what we have is we have the just month, the July, August, September months. These are the main months when the rainy season actually is. August, we know, is a rainy month throughout, and then September also it steps down, but July is also in Nigeria a very rainy month. So this is the time, the just month, July, August, and September. These are the months.
Whatever happened to the so-called August break?
Yeah, August break do take place, actually. But in the southern part of the country, you hardly notice anything called August break.
Anymore. Because perhaps, well, as some professionals will say, that the climate change has actually changed the August break. Now, Engineer Mustafa Mehaja is the Director General of the National Emergency Management Agency. You're always called to duty when the deed is done and when the havoc must have been wreaked, and you were there to save life and property. Now, are there other mitigatory efforts with respect to what could be done to avert the mass killing of people and the loss of property from NEMA angle? Is there any pre-arrangement, put in place, you normally put in place to ensure that you assist some communities that have been predicted to have this flood to be mitigated?
Well, thank you. As you might be aware, just yesterday at the National Economic Council, we made a presentation which actions ought to have been taken before, but because of some delays along the line, we plan to work together with the states and the Presidential Committee on Flood, headed by Dangote, to ensure that all the canals, we worked on the canals in getting desiltations. Most of the canals and the rivers are really silted. And then we advised government that we should start working on that early enough since January. While we are preparing that, and this havoc started coming. So the states, I learned, have agreed to join forces with government, the federal government, and the Presidential Committee on Flooding to ensure that, to identify the canals, the major canals across the nation, so that we remove them of silt, so that there will be free flow of water when there is heavy downfall. Secondly, the activities of men regarding dumping of refuse is also a problem, because where you have drainages, they are all filled with refuse, and this action has to stop. So we try to work with the state government, whose responsibility mainly is to do that, to activate a system such that we reduce, if we cannot eliminate completely, the issue of this flooding. If there are no obstruction along the canals, even if there is flood, it will be not as devastating as what we experience today.
I'm wondering, stay with you, Engineer Mehaja, when will the desiltation of the canals and drainages commence? In the dry season, when the canals themselves are silted and blocked, everybody goes about their normal business. And now that the floods are here, is this time we want to start desilting?
No. It's not a simple project. It's a project across the nation. There are really so many canals across the nation. But we will commence the process. We have started the process, and I believe within the year we'll go far in desilting the canals and removing the debris.
Who are the we? Who are the we?
The federal government, the state government, and all stakeholders involved now agreed to come together as an emergency situation to ensure that these canals, we are not talking of the major rivers. The major rivers are the relevant agency, as you are aware, is NIWA. NIWA has been working on it. We are aware of the fact that they are working on the major issue of, desilting major rivers like River Benue, River Niger, and other major rivers. That aside, these are smaller canals that the tributaries really channel their water to the main river. So we are talking of that. We have commenced a process, and I believe the seriousness of this government can assure everybody that yes, we are going to, but I believe by next year we'll have many of them desilted and they will
just
removed.
as Kingsley asked, who are the we? You said federal government and state government. Is there any collaboration, deliberate collaboration going on at the moment to of what effect what you have just explained?
I can say there is, because it is the understanding has been reached yesterday. Federal government will bring 30% of the needed resources. The state will bring 30, while the Dangote committee will bring 40. That has been understood, and I believe that is a very big step to achieving what we want in working along the issue of clearing the canals and then removing the debris in the nearest future.
All right, we have a Professor Mohammed Hassan here from the Faculty of Environment at the University of Abuja. You have listened to other guests, of course, make input in this conversation. We'd like you to react to some of the issues raised from the Commissioner of Environment in Katsina State to Professor Adanu. What's your take?
Okay, thanks for having me. First, I would like to correct that I'm from the Department of Geography and Environmental Management, Faculty of Social Sciences, University of Abuja. I would like to comment particularly on the comment made by the last speaker regarding the silting. I think we should ask, after the silting, can't we also have the river channels, the natural channels of the rivers being silted again? So what breeds these silt in natural channels of rivers? I think we shouldn't just look in one direction. We must look at our land use practices that breeds the silting. Naturally, one may ask, how do I mean by our land use practices? You know, when rain falls, the excess water that flows on the surface of the earth will always take line of natural gravity. And then if farmers in the rural communities tend to make their ridges along parallel to these natural contour lines, it exacerbate the process of soil erosion. So we need to attack the processes that produces this silt in our natural river channels so that we don't have to spend so much money in desilting. And I can assure you that Nigerian government, you know, does not have the money to desilt all the silted natural river channels, as well as structures that were being made along these natural rivers to kind of, in terms of flood control. I'm talking about dams, reservoirs, lakes, and levees. So we need to look at our land use practices that will be sustainable in such a way that we do not generate a lot of soil erosion, because it's these finer particles of soil that we call silt that gets carried and trailed by running water, and they now settled on these natural channels, and they now begin to make the natural channels, you know, shallower and shallower. And when you have a heavy downpour, like the ones we are discussing in Katsina and Ogun State, then of course the space will not be enough to accommodate the volume of water that is being generated. And then you have water spilling over, and then we have incidences of flood. And I think in terms of the causes, we also have to look at, you know, the way we plan our urban centers. Is not enough to say we should stop dumping. In fact, in certain areas or in most urban centers, they are not planned. There are no provisions for channels, artificial channels, built to ensure that these drains, drain excess water in case, we have a heavy downpour. And that is why we have this kind of scenario, in urban centers. And in addition to that, I think we need to create a kind of educational awareness right from the kindergarten to the university level. And I have been an advocate of environmental education. These will address issues of environment, one of which is, of course, flooding.
Well, Professor Al-Hassan, still with you, I would like us to drill down, for instance, into the issue of shared responsibility for the management of the environment. Already, from what we are hearing from the National Economic Council, in terms of the resolutions that they reached yesterday at their monthly meeting, now you're going to have a collaboration involving state government, federal government, the Dangote Committee that was set up on the heels of the flood disaster of 2012. But Mehaja, DG of NEMA, is hopeful that, by next year, some of these challenges would have been mitigated. But there is the example of Lagos State. Lagos State, over the years, has taken on the challenge of desilting various blocked canals and drainages, and it is still work in progress, and this has gone on for well over 10 years. When and how should state governments, local governments, and indeed other persons responsible for environmental management take on these challenges head on, rather than waiting on the federal government or waiting for a national committee to be getting on with desilting?
Well, I think in the first instance, governments across levels, the federal, the state, and then the local government do not, I think there is this confusion as regards, is the sole responsibility of this type of government. I think it should be all inclusive and not only left to the government alone. The media too has a role to play. And I'm happy that we have this kind of discussion here today. The role of the media goes beyond this kind of discussion. The media should also go a long way, to kind of highlight certain habits, Nigerians, exhibit, and the fact that environmental issues, should not be left to the government. We must have the private sector coming in. Thank God the multi-billionaire is on the team. And then apart from that, we also need to get communities involved. Communities must not wait for government, to begin to clear their drains, and the rest. We normally have these environmental sanitation, like in cities, so that will go a long way in trying to bring down the cost of desilting canals, like you cited in the case of Lagos. So communities must also get involved. NGOs, CBOs, and religious faith-based organizations must also come on board in terms of tackling these various environmental issues, one of which is flooding.
All right. Thank you very much indeed. Let's return to Professor Adanu. Professor Adanu, before now, you were the director of dams at the Federal Ministry of Water Resources. And there are some dams in this country constructed to play a key role in taking in excess water to avert what we see today as flooding across the nation. Now, could you tell us the state of some of those dams that have been deliberately constructed for this purpose?
Well, I don't know which dams you are referring to. The only one that has been as a result of an impact assessment is the Kashimbila Dam. They are supposed to take water from an imminent break of Lake Nyos in Cameroon. The dam is there and is functioning and is impounding water. The lake has not broken, so it has not started working based on the design. But I know it can contain it if the lake breaks. But let me just say something. Now, they intend, they said, the DG, NEMA said, they intend to desil the little dams, the tributaries in the country. I hope they are very careful with what they intend to do. If you desit all those little tributaries, you are increasing their capacity to take water. Now you are not considering the main rivers they are discharging this water to. If those rivers are silted up, they will not be able to take the waters coming from those tributaries. They will back up. But I think we need a more holistic approach, a plan that will take into consideration the total drainage pattern of this country. The flooding, if you look at the pattern of flooding and the predictions we've had from NIMET and NISA over the years, if you can go back to 10, 15 years, the flooding has a very repeatable trend. The country is being drained today, about 60 to 65% of it, by about 5 hydrogeological areas. And the drain into the Y shape of our drainage, the 2 rivers, only 3 of them don't drain into this. Now, the micro analysis of the basins that contribute to this major tributary or major rivers is very important. Now, if you try to check all those, all the dams designed today and built were not just principally for flood control, though they control flood. They are not principally for flood control. But we are not operating some of them properly. And also, some of them don't even have the structures for the proper operation. Now, after 2012, we say that any dam constructed in Nigeria must have a flood operating structure, like a bottom outlet where you can discharge water when it's too much, and then prepare for the rainy season when waters will come. We already have that. But not all our dams are designed for that. But that aside, the Institute, the National Water Resources Institute, is trying to come out with a plan for flood control, and we try to train people. Right now, we even have a project coming on the training of some of these people for flood management and designs. But the dams we have in the country today are not, one, they are not enough. Secondly, they are not properly equipped to control our floods. So we don't have any dam right now apart from the Kashimbela that was meant purposely for flood control. But we can do that. Now, the DG Nema mentioned the desilting. They should not also forget the fact that some of those tributaries can be dammed to provide, at least to hold back water from getting to the mainstream. Professor Mohammed was right to the point when he was talking about the activities there. We have the silting coming. How do we check them? We don't just desilt just because we can also protect the watershed environment from the silt coming into the rivers. If you do that, though it's a very difficult thing, but we have to train our people to design that. Now, occupationally, we have agriculturalists in some of these areas, and they till the ground. That is occupation. It's very difficult for us to control the silting totally, but we can manage it. And we keep going as we are managing the silt. We also try to see how we can accommodate the silt that comes, the one we cannot manage. So we are also coming out with sediment traps and all these things. We have the design so that we can trap some of the sediments, even if you don't construct the dams. You trap some of the sediments along the rivers so that the desilting will not be the main. It's very expensive to desilt any dam or even a river. But it may have to happen because we need to do that at least to keep our environment very safe.
Professor Adano, very briefly, before we bring in a guest via Skype from Katsina, is the country's natural drainage system capable of helping us withstand the flooding that has been predicted for this year and perhaps in subsequent years, or we need some urgent reactions?
Well, capability of a drainage system is not something we can just say. The drainage system of this country existed before human beings came there. So naturally, the drainage system is capable of draining Nigeria. But with our habits, we have now changed the pattern a bit. We're just scratching on the phenomenon. We've changed the habit a bit. But if we look at the drainage system, Nigeria has one of the best drainage systems in the world today as a country, because they have a Y shape like a funnel that takes a lot of water into the main rivers and down into the ocean. Now, in between this, all those tributaries that contribute water to the main two rivers have their own configuration and behavior. Now, the configuration and the behavior is also tempered by natural events and also human activities. Human activities in terms of agriculture, even the dam construction if not properly sited. Now, those are the areas that are the problems to the main rivers. Because if they are contributing water to the main rivers and you don't protect them very well, you don't know their behavior, even if you know their behavior, you don't have the power to moderate the behavior. It is a problem. So, whether we have the drainage system that is capable of discharging our water, we have, naturally, even without anybody tampering with it. The flooding we're having is the discharge of the drainage patterns. But if it passes through an economic environment, human or industry or this, it then becomes a problem. So our attitude also must be brought into play. We know the areas we are going to flood. If I mentioned earlier that over the years, we have a unique pattern, areas that must be flooded every year. The intensity of the flood is what brings us to this kind of show. But the flooding itself, yes, and flooding to some extent is not totally a negative impact. Flooding can be positive, especially when people don't live there. The flooding will bring a lot of nutrients into the ground, flooded the land, and you can do agricultural activities. But when it has to do with economic materials and human beings, then it becomes a problem. We still need to sit down very well and know the pattern. Because in Nigeria today, if you know where our waters come from, within Nigeria, where the waters come from, internally generated water in Nigeria, is very high, very, very high. And we need to see how we moderate and control this so that we use it to our benefit. Because this flooding will keep coming. Flooding will keep coming. You can't stop it. Magashi just mentioned that the 2012 flood was about a 50-year return period. In some areas, it was even 90 years return period, 60 and 80. Flood will still come. But what is our capacity? What do we see if the flood comes? Where do we think it will affect? What do we do now to at least mitigate the effect or reduce? I think these are the things we should be considering right now. We've been doing this, it's becoming a ritual now for us to come here every year and talk about flood, 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 flood. Let's see what we are doing. All the efforts we put in, have they been able to at least reduce the effect of this flood? Let's try and ask this. And our next program, please, you put us into this kind of situation so that we know what we are doing. After all this sensitization you are doing, we should be brought into play to announce to this country whether we are effective in tackling this flood from all the years of sensitization that NTA is doing. It's very important. We need to tell you what we are doing. If we are not doing anything, we need to sit up and do something. Because when I heard that flood took a lot of people in Katsina, I was very frightened. Katsina was predicted not to even to experience a flood this year. But now it's one of the areas that it's unfortunate. I think we need to do something. We have to come out with at least something that is positive. That this country will know, yeah, we are doing this. And we can keep replicating them in other areas. Thank you.
Thank you for that analysis. And Kingsley, what is so worrying is the fact that even some countries that have the best of a drainage system and even the technology to handle this are also suffering flooding.
Japan,
so it's
100 persons at least.
Yes, and that's where we will bring in the issue of climate change, but not for now, as we go back to Katsina, where the flood has already taken place. Honorable Commissioner Brodo, now the flood has taken place in Katsina, and we are still in the heat of the 2018 rainfall. So there could be possibility of having more rains in that part of the country. Now, is there any plan by the government to see how any future occurrence could be mitigated? Well, it does seem we have lost signals along the line of communication with the Katsina there. We may return when our engineers must have done done some job on it. All right, now back to Abuja here once more, and let us Kingsley bring in the issue of climate change. Why is this?
Yeah, just before we bring in climate change, because sometimes that becomes, a ready excuse for all kinds of rationalization with regard to why we're having flooding. The hydrological services, the director, of course, who is here with us, let's let him speak some more about what to expect. Look, last year, for instance, as you said, there was some flooding in some parts of the country. In Lagos, for instance, I mean, Lagos witnessed unusual rainfall, and Amadu Bello Way, Victoria Island, parts of Lekki, they were all submerged. And you had somebody who was kayaking, in the floods on Victoria Island. So what is it that we should expect? We already know that virtually all the states of the Federation will be affected, but where will be the most impact in terms of flooding? And what is it that you are advising those states or those locations to do in anticipation of what is coming?
Thank you once more. For Lagos State, which is a coastal state, and for all coastal states in the country, flooding is there and it has come to stay, because in most cases, most of those communities are even living in water. So these are situations where you have, once there is a rise in the sea level, and particularly once you have the rainy season setting in, a lot of water comes in from all the streams, feeding most of the places. And now you see that there is a little rise. And once there is a rise in the water level, and in the international oceans, you see that the level rises and then floods occur, particularly in the coastal states. This we have to live with.
Okay, for a long time, the way it appears now. Okay, let's return to Katsina, to Brodo, Honorable Commissioner for Information, Culture and Home Affairs. I had earlier put a question across to you as to what plans are in place right now to mitigate the future flooding, because of course we're still in the heat of rainfall for this season, and there's likelihood to have more rains in Katsina. Is there any plans being put in place now to mitigate what could, of course, could be a future occurrence of the flood?
Thank you very much. The state authority is busy taking census of the number of houses that got destroyed by the flood, and also taking general stock of destruction of property caused by this flood, and is already making arrangement to resettle the victims affected by the flood, because it is presently about 500 houses so far been identified to have been either totally destroyed or seriously devastated by the flood. So the state government is making frantic effort in this regard to make sure that the immediate resettlement of these people that were affected. But before then, we've already made a very prompt and positive response by erecting or establishing settlement, or if I may use, a camp in one of the primaries within the town. And this is where these victims were being at. A lot of facilities are made available, like clinic and
well, we have a freeze there. Well, once we have another clear channel to Alhaji Hamza, we'll go back to him to discuss aspects of the Katsina flood disaster. But let's return to Engineer Mehaja, Director General of NEMA. The DG NEMA, when you were speaking earlier, you were talking about what the collaborative efforts will be involving the federal government, the state governments, and other stakeholders. Well, the impression seems to have been created, maybe you need to clarify that, that perhaps NEMA is overextending itself. Is NEMA going to be involved in desilting? Otherwise, the question to answer would be, how prepared is NEMA to move in the event of a flood disaster? And what efforts have you put in so far?
Well, actually, I intend to make that clarification. We need to understand our mandate to coordinate the activities of all stakeholders regarding mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery in any emergencies. Also want to correct Prof. in Kaduna. We are going to involve all stakeholders in carrying out this assignment, so that the right knowledge and know-how is put in together to get a solution for this problem. There is no confusion, as contrary to what Prof said as regarding responsibilities. The responsibility of the state government is very clear. That of the federal government is very clear. But we have a joint responsibility. The present position, the stakeholders, I could say, because of the enormity of the problems, could not provide the needed response regarding mitigation of this problem. So the federal government felt we must bring, in an emergency situation, bring all the stakeholders together to really confront head-on the problem, so that loss of life and properties is reduced. That is what we are trying to do. So we coordinate all the activities of the stakeholders. We bring, but the right person to do what is who will do that. But we must ensure that everybody is brought in together to make sure that we worked on this issue and reduce the problem, if not eliminating it.
I asked the question about the level of preparedness. What kind of equipment do you have? And then what kind of equipment do you expect the SEMAs, that is to say the State Environmental Emergency Management Agencies or authorities, however so called, to also have? Elsewhere around the world, you see people with inflatable boats. You see them with canoes that they can paddle. I mean, last year, for instance, Houston. Houston was, submerged, and we saw what happened. That's an advanced country. Do you have do your men or men at the state level have the capacity, for instance, to rescue a person who is drowning in a flood?
Well, the fact is there is none, particularly in most of the SEMAs. This is the problem the emergency agencies have in the country. We have a structure where the federal is being organized by NEMA at national level, the SEMAs at the state level, and the local at the local government, local emergency community. There is very weak link. The SEMAs are not properly funded. They are not properly really organized. In fact, some of the states are yet to promulgate a law to get them on. So the reality is there is a weak link. That is why most of the time NEMA is overstretched. And I want to use this opportunity to call upon the state governments where the SEMAs are weak to get them on, fund them properly. And I must use this opportunity to commend the Lagos state government. They are doing an exceptionally good job. They have a well-organized and highly capacity SEMA. Most of their responses, we only go there to support them. They do it themselves. And this is how all SEMAs should be. So this is a fact on ground. This is the fact on ground. So therefore, the weak link is at the state level, and we need to get it on. And that is why, even at this stage, when we said that the states and the federal and also the Dangote group to come, is to sort of catalyze the system so that to ignite them, so the right thing should be done. We as government, a responsible government, we should not just watch. This is your responsibility. We must get you up to your own responsibility. This is what we are trying to do.
It's necessarily the case, I would imagine, that, Kyrian, considering the enormity of the devastation usually arising from flooding, that it doesn't now just suffice to rely on the fire service, which perhaps some state governments are doing, even though local governments play, nary a role whatsoever in the fire service. Is this a matter beyond the capacity, for instance, of the fire service, and therefore the need for the state governments to ensure that their various SEMAs are up to scratch?
Well, this is altogether the same thing we are talking about. The issue of the fire service in the state, they are not well equipped. They are not. They need to be equipped in reality. For example, there is incidents in the 2 weeks ago in Mina. The NNPC nearly got engulfed into the depot. We had to mobilize the federal service, even from Abuja. Of course, the state government has an equipment, just one equipment. We have to mobilize from Abuja. I was in touch with the engineer Navy over the night to ensure that we move whatever we have here to Mina. But if it happened, supposing somewhere in Enugu, to mobilize equipment from here might be difficult. But thank God, the efforts of all stakeholders yield results. We were able to stop that fire just less than 200 meters to the tanks. That could have been devastating situation or incidents if it had reached the tanks. The farm tanks were there, but we were saved, and we were there almost for 48 hours, all through trying to see that this is what NEMA does, to ensure that all stakeholders respond at a good time and do whatever. But where the stakeholder is less equipped, it has less capacity, that is our problem. NEMA sometimes even had to acquire some of the equipment to move along with them to ensure that we train them, we enlighten them, but the funding issue, the equipment issue, the capacity issue is still a problem.
It's still a problem. Now, and from all indications and from your position, it's quite clear, that we are not indeed prepared for the floodings that we've been experiencing over the years. And just like Professor Damu did say, that there should be a time when we should sit together and say, what has been done in the past? What has it impacted on the system? We don't just keep creating awareness and sensitizing the people without achieving results. Well, at this point, we'd like to share in what other Nigerians are saying with respect to our conversation this morning, perhaps after which we may have to talk about the natural aspect of what is going on. That's the climate change. But for now, let's see what Nigerians are saying. I am Chris. He says a building on waterways and channel remains a fundamental cause of these floodings. People must know the implications of the actions, and those who enforce environmental laws should wake up to their responsibilities.
Now, Oka Ebo tweets, residents of areas prone to flooding should adhere to early warning by NAMET, keep their drainages clear, and abide by approved building plans by relevant authorities.
Now, from Kazim Suleiman, if I understand correctly, NEMA should be more of a rescue mission and disaster management. So what capacity or what does NEMA plan to do immediately there is outbreak of flood in the country, and more flood is still expected, as the recent flood is just the tip of the iceberg?
That's right, Kira. That's what the DG NEMA has also been speaking to. We'll return to him, of course, in the course of the conversation. And Melody Yusuf tweets, now the truth is many of our rivers are silting up due to increased human activities of farming and infrastructure development, resulting in these rivers having their carrying capacities reduced. We should have deliberate policies to dredge our rivers to their capacities.
All right, Sani Michael Makoji rather. According to NIMET's prediction, Kogi and Benue State are on the red alert again for this year's flooding. Incidentally, these are two leading states in non-payment of salaries. Thus, the hardship of non-payment of salaries plus flooding can be overbearing. God, come to our aid. I don't think this issue of salary should come in here.
That's right. Favor Diva tweets, now flood, as I know, is supposed to be natural, but in Nigeria, this is man-made. Now, the states that have streams that cross the town should endeavor to build canals across those routes, not leaving them the way they are.
All right. The same favor says IBB did a very good job in Niger State with good drainage system built by Julius Berger. If every flood-prone state can emulate, also Cross River is known to for neatness, because people don't throw debts anywhere. There should be war against that. A law should be made to prosecute offenders.
And then Dele Jack Solomon tweets, NIMET should help improve our flood warning system so as to give people more time to take action during flooding to potentially save lives. Advanced warning and pre-planning can significantly reduce the impact of flooding. There is also the need to keep tackling climate change scenarios. NIMET, NIMET gives the rainfall predictions for the year, and the Hydrological Services gives the flooding patterns for the year.
Exactly.
That's
and
right.
Sani, Michael Makoji, this is the last one for this morning. Though flooding is a natural disaster, but it's really disheartening that we wait for it to occur before we think of remedy. If I may ask, since 2012, when we had worst flooding, how many dams have been constructed to reduce its effects? Why are we like this? It's so bad, he says.
All right. Well, you saw on the screen a moment ago the Commissioner for Information in Katsina. If we have an all clear to go to him, I'll just ask him this last question before the lines become unstable one more time. Alhaji Hamza, if you can hear me, give us a sense of what is happening with regard to public information management in respect to those who have been affected by the floods in Jibia. Is there a sense of fatalism to say, well, this is an act of God, it was bound to happen, it has happened? Or how well are you seeking to manage, their response to this kind of eventuality sometime in the future?
Well, if I understood you very well, what we are doing right now and we have been doing is we sensitize people on issues or disaster of this nature. People should make frantic effort to heed to the advice given by the government. However, we are on the other side calling on people to not just be taking things as act of God. There are certain preventive measures individual and authority could actually advance to forestall future recurrence of this nature, and the state is committed to that.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your submission. Let's return to Professor Al-Hassan. Professor Hassan, let's bring in, the climate change perspective to this conversation. Of course, we know that it has become a fact that climate change is here with us. And of course, when Kingsley put a question to the man from the Hydrological Agency, he did mention that August break may have disappeared. All right, so what is the role of climate change in all of this?
Well, climate is an established weather pattern for an area for at least a period of less than 35 years. But when this established pattern, you could plan and then make predictions. But with the incidence of climate change, these established patterns, no longer holds. So you are like taking unawares because this is what you are used to. But now with the pattern being not stable, it changes. Then of course, it brings in the issue of what I would say, we need to build our capacities in terms of weather modeling. We have to bring in what I call numerical weather modeling so that we could predict the pattern of climate and then and then the pattern of change at short notice. I'm sure you are aware of the fact that in advanced climes, they're able to predict when these wind systems are building up before they become hurricane, and then category 1, category 2, up to 5, when it becomes so devastating. And they are also able to predict the pattern, the way it passes through, and those communities, that will be within the line of fire. And then they make contingency plan in terms of when it will make a landfall, and then when they needed to be evacuated. We need to put up that kind of capacity. That is the only way we can get about sudden change, in terms of established weather pattern. I'm sure you saw what happened in Florida when it was building up, 2-3 days before it reaches Florida. The governor of Florida was telling his people that you need to evacuate. And they did that perfectly well. And the media was also, for the first time, we watched the event unfold on our TV screen. So in terms of climate change, there is little we can do to change that, but then we can increase our capacity to predict and then get ourselves, prepared so that we can reduce the resultant damages in terms of properties, and lives. And then secondly, please, I would want to make a comment regards our discussion. It's like we are like going the normal Nigerian trend, treating the, the symptoms and not looking at the cause. I think there are so many things that we need to do before we begin to talk about mitigation measures. If you look at our urban areas, we need to come up, with what I refer to as planning. If you don't plan your urban areas, there are a lot of, problems that will emerge. Like the case in Katsina, it has to do with planning. The area is not well planned. There are no drains. Where the drains are, they are not, they are blocked. They've not been drained. So we should look at the concept of urban planning. In areas where, the urban areas are not planned, we bring in what is being referred to as urban renewal, where infrastructures such as drains are non-existent. You now begin to make them available in these areas because they will take this excess water. Secondly, we need to look at our building code. Most of our buildings are not flood resistant. These natural disasters like earthquakes and the rest and what have you, advances in modern science and technology has availed us the opportunity to overcome them. You have a kind of a building code, and then all new developments or developers, will have to abide by this building code. But where you have the houses mostly made up of mud, there are no supervision, and the rest, so in case you have this kind of distractions, they are most vulnerable. So we need to instill this building code to ensure that whoever comes up with any development will be able to withstand floods, at least in flood-prone areas. And one important aspect, which is flood vulnerability risk assessment, and then with associated vulnerability mapping. In other climes, this has been done. They know the areas that are vulnerable to flooding, and then they also exclude any form of development. In Nigeria, you will see buildings coming up in areas, even if you're a layman, you know that this area is vulnerable to flood in case you have excess water. These areas are not supposed to be built, but you see, even in urban centers, they are being allocated as residential plots. And then when you have some kind of distractions, these houses are flooded, sometimes with resultant loss of life. So we need to instill the concept of having a vulnerability risk assessment as well as mapping. We need to also ensure that we have planning, because if you don't, in planning, you also imbibe the provisions for safety. There is safety provisions, and then you also have what we refer to as emergency situations when they come in. But most of our urban centers, in case you have emergencies like these, it makes rescue, very difficult because they are not imbibed into the planning concept. And secondly, aside vulnerability risk assessment, we also, the media should have taken a greater role in terms of assessing the ability of the agencies who are statutorily assigned the responsibility of providing succor or managing. The media should have been on ground, giving us, on the minute-by-minute happenings, in Jibia and then in Ogun, just like we saw in Florida. So I think the media can also go a little bit, when disasters like this happen, to give this kind of on-the-minute assessment. With that, we can assess the capability and ability of these agencies, to provide the services they are meant to provide.
Professor Al Hassan, thanks a lot. I mean, we have seen examples. The point is made about the media is noted. But we've also seen examples of real life, reportage of flood incidents. Last year, for instance, in Niger State, if you recall, it was somewhere around Suleja, I believe. Yes, flood disaster. And then you had to have people who were being rescued. And the media, NTA covered that extensively. And of course, there's also limitation with respect to your capacity to move, and then for you to have, helicopters and then have overhead cameras that you can use to photograph all of that. But I was just going to add, because we are pressed now to begin to go on our homeward stretch. You've talked about a number of causative factors, but how respectful ultimately are we of our environment? And aren't we, as it were now, reaping the consequences of our disrespect for our environment?
Yeah, I think I will quite agree with you that we are not respectful because of, one, we are ignorant of environmental issues. And that is why at the onset of this program, I advocated for environmental education, right from kindergarten. Because if you are very much aware of your environment, you wouldn't engage in any activity that will block drains. You wouldn't build on areas not approved by authority. Even when authority is putting in, the red ink, you still go ahead, with construction. We will also begin to advocate for building codes in urban centers. And it might interest you to know that it's only in Nigeria where our natural river channels are not lined. You go to other areas, all their natural river systems, the channels are lined to kind of reduce erosion, and then the extent of silt that comes into these natural channels that we talked about earlier on. So we need to bring back that concept of environmental education so that we will now begin to capture all aspects of our environment. Nigerians from the kindergarten, they will be aware of these environmental issues. And once we're able to do that, I think it would have eliminated most of the bad practices, we've enumerated. Not only the fact that we have bad practices in waste management, but even our farmers, the way they also engage in their farming practices so that, we don't make the land vulnerable to running water. And then the soil, will not block those natural channels. So it should be a kind of a comprehensive package.
Okay, right. Now, because, of course, we need the environment more than the environment needs us. And at this point, we're returning to Kaduna to Professor Danu. Professor Danu, we are rounding off gradually. We would like your final thoughts on this conversation.
Well, we have a problem, and the problem will persist. If you are a geologist, I would say, well, you may understand what is happening. We have this principle of uniformitarianism. That is, the earth processes with natural laws. They work together to reshape the crust of the earth, and they've been doing it from the past, and they will keep doing it until any time the earth dies out. So these processes are ongoing. In between, we have catastrophism, and the first one was the flood of Noah. Some of these things happen, but we are now in a situation that we live with them. Just as Professor Hassan just said, there are several things we need to do in the country to make sure that we mitigate the effect. Now, I made a statement on the desilting. I think the DG NEMA didn't understand me well. It's not about the responsibility that is being given to anybody. It's about what we need to do, the desilting, how it's going to be done. Now, if you say you want to control flooding in a city, for instance, you may have a measure for it, you clean all your channels and all this, then you avoid these flash floods that come into a city to take over houses. What of a flood that comes and takes over the whole city? That's a different one. We must concentrate on how we have a holistic, while we have the discrete ones, we should have a major one too. The plans are there. We have to live with flooding. We are going to live with flooding, but at least the sensitization is going on very well by NTA, and I love it. But what of our responses? Can we at least have statistics of achievements made so far? Have we empowered a lot of people to at least save their own houses? Have we empowered cities or to know what is to be done? Are we reckless? Do we have practices like the habitual practices that can be curtailed if we listen to experts? This will, because we are going to live with flood. And as soon as we take into consideration the benefits of flood, if we try to also put it in our plan that flooding can be very useful, I think we are now starting. Because this flooding is not totally devastating if we want to look at that way. There are many things we can get out of flood. Because it.
All right, Professor Adano, well, thank you very much. Very quickly, DG of NEMA, Engineer Mehaja, in the event of a flood, what are the do's and don'ts?
Well, first of all, we have National Emergency Response Plan, it's clearly stipulated step by step, and all the stakeholders are lighting along that line. The first respondent in case of flood is fire service. If it is in local government, the fire service, and if it is in the state fire service, and the federal level come when it is catastrophic disaster. So as regard to fire incidents, the fire service, we have a call room where information get to us, and then we quickly inform the fire service to move. So as flood is also within the jurisdiction of fire service. So these are how it is organized.
Yeah, I'm talking about do's and don'ts. I mean, there's a flash flood somewhere and people are panicking. What should they do? What shouldn't they do?
Or in the case of where there is flood, people must move to the higher level. They must not wait to take items.
Their property,
they should move to higher ground. But that is the case when it happens in the day. The case of Jibia, it happens around 1 a.m. People were sleeping, you know, they were taken unaware. Right. So that is why, in fact, up to now, more than 60 people are still missing. You know, about 50 are dead, confirmed dead. So this is the first thing. We move to higher ground. Don't take anything along with you, and then you quickly. You can save, of course, the search and rescue, if they mobilize quickly, they try to save who is there. And issues of facilities come in, whereby if this really a huge flood, you need helicopters to save with them and things like that. So
Thank you. It's not really easy, especially when it happens in the middle of the night, like it did in Katsina. Thank you so much, all our guests, for your contributions. And I would like to, first of all, thank Engineer Umar Bashir Magaji, Director General, Hydrology Nigeria, from the Nigerian Hydrological Agency. Thank you very much indeed for being part of our program this morning. And also Professor Mohammed Al-Hassan from the Faculty of Geography? Department of Geography. All right.
Environmental Management.
Exactly. Thank you for bringing the academic perspective to this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, thank you indeed. And again, Alhaji Hamza Mohammed Brodo, Honorable Commissioner for Information, Culture and Home Affairs, Katsina State. Thank you for giving Nigerians the right information about what's on ground now in Jibia, Katsina State. Thank you very much indeed for your time. And finally, Director, National Water Resources Institute, Kaduna, Professor Emmanuel Adanu. It's always exciting having you on the show. Thank you for reaching us all the way from Kaduna State. All right, and that's how we are concluding the conversation segment of this program. We're now moving to our complementary, news
segments.
items and segments.
Right. Let's go over to the sports desk.
Exactly.